to the conference organizers for doing a spectacular job of putting together another great conference. And we are always very delighted to participate in the discussion for natural resource investment in the Republic of Serbia. My presentation's a bit broad, and I think that's important because when we think about investment in natural resources, we are really competing with capital globally, and we are competing with capital in various sectors. So what I've done here is I've tried to itemize the risk categories between technical, jurisdiction, and financial, and identify some risk factors within each category, and then talk about really what Serbia's benefits are. So I'm going to start with technical. And technical can vary between exploration, development, and obviously production. But let's just start with the basic concept, since we're on the exploration panel, with exploration, and that is you have to have mineral prospectivity. And certainly Serbia has that within the Tethyan Belt and obviously the Timok mining camp. Infrastructure is equally important for exploration as it is for ultimate production. And certainly Serbia has very good infrastructure, excellent local experience in terms of labor, and a quite solid tax regime, which I'll kind of get into in a little bit later. And of course the services community, which one of the other speakers just brought up. There are a lot of service companies that are available in Serbia for both supporting exploration, also development and production. So I think where Serbia has significantly improved over the last 5 years is on the jurisdictional aspect. Certainly 5 years ago, a lot of investors didn't really understand where Serbia was in terms of a jurisdiction for mining. Obviously there's a very long mining community within the country, but certainly from an international point of view that wasn't very well understood. And certainly the mineral law changes over the last few years have helped significantly. You know, when you're thinking about whether you're going to invest in an exploration company that's going to be exploring, for example, copper in Serbia versus, for example, perhaps Ontario or somewhere in South America, you really want to have a very good handle on what the mineral laws are. And by Serbia taking that lead over the last 5 years has made a significant benefit for the country in terms of investment. Social license to operate, I think this is a tremendously unique opportunity that Serbia has that it should leverage, and which is that 100 years of mining community. We have that in Canada, and I always like to compare, for example, Bor to Sudbury, which is a very well-known mining camp in Canada. 100 years of investing in communities that understand mining and exploration, I think, is a tremendous benefit, and certainly that's where Stara Planina, our local company, is focused. The last point of view on financial risk is something that is very difficult to control. And certainly from a government point of view and a jurisdiction point of view, you're really just trying to help the investor in terms of the long lead times that are required to invest into exploration, development, production, and finally get cash flow. So you can never time commodity cycles perfectly, although some people say they can. That commodity cycle issue is significant, and if a government, a jurisdiction can demonstrate that it is there with the investor for the long haul through the cycles, that makes it tremendously easier for investors to come into a jurisdiction. So I apologize for the terrible graphic, but this kind of gives you an idea of everything from exploration, development, construction, production, and mine closure. And what's important to note here is that 4 out of the 5 categories there are no profits. So again, managing your risk as an investor to come into a jurisdiction is extremely important, and why working with the government is critical. I use this slide because at the end of the day, and as the prior speaker just noted, you know, we need to do good comparison and show globally where we are. So here is the Tethyan Belt on my left here. In this part of the belt, you have 174 gold and copper projects that are being explored, developed, and operated. In South America, between southern Peru and northern Chile, you have 1,100. Now, why is that? Is it pure metal prospectivity? I would argue no, that's not the case. These countries changed their laws back in the 1980s. That is 4 decades of time to convince investors and companies to go into those jurisdictions and start investing and exploring and making discoveries. Another really good example is Ontario and Quebec in Canada. So in this portion of Ontario and Quebec, we have 2,600 copper gold projects that are being invested in, both exploration, development, and 94 operating mines. Canada has 100 years of experience in being a jurisdiction that is open for foreign investment into the natural resources sector, creating clear laws and creating legislation where companies really understand what the rules are. And so on that front, Serbia has done exceptionally well over the last 5 years to change and upgrade the laws and to really demonstrate that foreign investment is welcome here in natural resources. So my view is that over the next 10 years, we will see a lot more exploration and investment in this sector here. So time to production. This is a very well-used slide in the public domain at a lot of conferences. So it says here that in the 1980s, your typical time to get from discovery to production was 5 years, which is almost unheard of today, unless you have, of course, a very small project. And these are all for larger assets. In the 1990s, late 1990s, early 2000s, it's a decade from discovery to production. Not small mines, but medium to large mines. Today, in 2017, we have 2 decades. 2 decades from discovery to production. That is a very long investment to wait for cash flow. So that is why it is so important that governments get it right in terms of how to attract these investors and how to work through those permitting processes. And if this chart is correct, it's going to go up to 30 years by 2019. So hurdles, obviously permitting is a major issue. Projects are becoming much larger, much more complex. The larger they are, the more engineering there is, and certainly from my point of view, the more engineering is, the more safe they are, obviously, for communities, but at the same time, a lot of capital gets invested. And then the last issue is discoveries. Where are the discoveries? Now, I did put this chart in just to kind of give you a sense of what this value curve looks like for investors from discovery, production, development to production. And you can see here when these mines went into production in Canada in the early 2000s, they were at around that 12 and 9-year mark, which is exactly where the chart showed. So discoveries. Discoveries are going down. And, you know, a lot of people ask, why are discoveries going down globally around the world for major assets? My own personal thesis, which some can argue with, is that there's not enough money going into exploration. If you don't spend money on exploration, you're not going to find any new deposits. So again, this comes back to why are investors hesitant to go back into exploration? Why are we seeing a drought? And it's risk. You know, it's going into, for example, Ontario, where you have those 2,000 companies, they'd rather pay a premium to go into those jurisdictions than go into new ones, not understanding, for example, that 10 to 20 year investment cycle that they have to go through. So the key message here is that Serbia, I think, has done a great job of improving the laws, getting foreigners to understand the jurisdiction. Capital is starting to flow in, and I think there will be more discoveries in the country. And a very important slide for us as the exploration panel is that you can't forget the exploration companies. Back in the 1970s, the state-owned companies and the major producers were the ones making discoveries because they had the budgets to go out. Today, it is absolutely 100% the lion's share is going to junior exploration companies. So one of the things that we often hear about when we go to foreign jurisdictions is that, well, you know, exploration doesn't spend enough, or exploration is, companies are very small. If the exploration companies don't come in and make the investment in these jurisdictions, there will be no discoveries and there will be no development. So really try and balance that ecosystem of companies within a jurisdiction. It's wonderful to see that Serbia is starting to get global exploration budgets coming into the country. They are recognized as a global kind of copper reserve location for future exploration. From a discovery cost point of view, it's $40 a resource ounce in Eastern Europe. It's definitely not going to last. We definitely are seeing prices creep up. but compared to the Western world, it's around $80. So if you're going to spend approximately $4 or $40 per resource ounce of gold to discover that resource, why would you pay $120 in the market for it today? And this is pretty interesting because this only changed about a year ago. A year ago, it was cheaper to buy it in the market than it was to go out and find it. And so now, a lot of private equity and a lot of capital in North America is again going to the value proposition of exploration. So you're going to see a lot more exploration companies that are supported by the markets. So Stara Planina, we are firmly focused on Serbia and the Timok complex. There we have, this is our land package, which is in red, and it's basically divided into two areas. The North Timok projects are in joint venture with JOGMEC, our partner, who is also here today. That is the Japanese Oil and Gas Metal Economics Corporation. And the southern package is an area that Mandoro is exploring on its own. In the North package, we have some very interesting drilling activity. Currently with our partner, we're drilling on Borsko. That was a very modest program that we had budgeted 600 meters at the beginning of the year, and it has ballooned into 6,000 meters and going. And so we're hopeful that by the end of the year, we'll be able to share those results with the markets. And certainly, Železnik is a very interesting area for us. It's at the northern end of the complex, and there we've discovered two mineralized zones, the west zone and the east zone, and there we're going to be going in this quarter and doing some fence drilling in order to really understand, kind of advance that exploration process into really understanding what's the volume, what's the tonnage, and what's the grade of those mineralized zones. In the southern license area, these are the 4 licenses, and there's a number of really interesting targets. It's a large land package. It takes time to get through, but with continued investment here, I think certainly this year we did some interesting drilling at Tilvaroche, and with some interesting geochemistry, we think we've identified not only some form of a high sulfidation system there, but also potentially a porphyry target. So something to kind of watch from us in terms of activity next year when we're here. So I think I'm over my time, but I'm happy to discuss more with the panel.
Thank you, Teodora, very much. Now, Richards.